Here is a number that I think should be printed on every audit report. Across compliance programs, a consistent finding is that a large share of agreed corrective actions are still open at the next audit cycle. Same finding, same owner, new date. Think about what that means. The audit worked, the finding was correct, management agreed, and nothing happened. So, the hardest question in our profession is not, can you find problems? Most of us can. It is, can you make them go away? I once opened an audit at a client and found my own finding from 2 years earlier, word for word, still open with a new due date. That was a humbling morning. So, what will this chapter give you? You will learn to track corrective actions so they actually close. You will handle management follow-up and reassessment. You will explore continuous compliance monitoring. And then, the part I think you will enjoy most, we go department by department. HR, marketing, IT, a bank or NBFC, an e-commerce company, real scenarios, real findings. We will look at the findings that appear almost everywhere, and we will close with a complete mock DPDP audit walkthrough, start to finish. Theory ends here. Let us go do the work. So let us talk about tracking, and I want to start by naming why this fails. It is not laziness, it is gravity. Here is what happens. The audit ends. The energy leaves the room. The auditor moves to the next engagement. The owner returns to their actual job, which is not fixing your finding. And the tracker becomes a spreadsheet nobody opens until 3 days before the next audit. That is gravity, and you have to build against it. So what works? 3 things. First, dates that are real. If someone accepts your date without pushing back, that date is fiction. Real dates get negotiated. I now refuse a due date that arrives without an argument. Second, visibility that costs something. A tracker in a folder is invisible. A tracker that appears in a management meeting where the owner must say the word open out loud in front of their peers, that is a different instrument entirely. Let me tell you about a client who cracked this. Their COO opened every monthly ops meeting with overdue privacy actions. By name. Not to shame anyone, just to ask, what do you need? Their closure rate went from 40% to over 90% in 2 quarters. Nothing else changed, only the visibility. Third, no silent extensions. If a date moves, someone senior must approve it, in writing, with a reason. Because dates that slip quietly slip forever. Track the movement, not just the status. So a corrective action is marked closed. And here is the question that separates a real auditor from a records clerk. Closed by whom? Because in most organizations, closed means the owner said it was done. That is it. Nobody checked. Let me tell you what that produces. At a client, I reviewed 22 actions marked closed in the previous cycle. I tested 7 of them. 4 were genuinely fixed. 2 were partially fixed, meaning the primary system was corrected and the replica was not. And 1 was honestly closed on the basis of an email saying, "We have addressed this." That last one had not been touched at all. The person who wrote the email had left. So here is my rule. Nothing closes on assertion. Closure requires the same evidence standard as the original finding. If system evidence proved the problem, system evidence must prove the fix. And here is the second thing which people miss. Reassess the risk, not just the action. Because sometimes the action is completed and the risk remains. They built the deletion job exactly as agreed. It runs monthly, and it does not touch backups, which is where the problem actually lived. Action closed, risk unchanged. So ask two questions. Did they do what they said, and did it work? Those are different questions. Ask both. So let us talk about where this is all heading, because I think the annual audit is a fading model and I want you to see why. Here is the problem with annual. You audit in March, you find things, they fix them by August, and then 11 months pass before anyone looks again. What happened in those 11 months? A migration, two new vendors, a marketing campaign that tripled data volume. Nobody knows. Your audit was a photograph of a river. So continuous monitoring asks a different question. Instead of, was this correct in March, it asks, is this correct right now? Let me give you an example of what this looks like in practice. A client built 4 automated checks. Records past retention date, still live. Accounts active belonging to leavers. Processing activities without a mapped lawful basis. Access requests past their deadline. 4 numbers, refreshed nightly, visible on a dashboard the DPO looks at every morning. Do you know what happened? Their annual audit got shorter, not longer. Because the obvious things were already caught. We spent our time on judgment, not on counting. Now here is my caution, and it matters. Monitoring is not auditing. A dashboard tells you what the system knows. It cannot tell you about the spreadsheet on someone's laptop, or the WhatsApp group, or the workaround nobody documented. Machines catch drift. People catch invention. You need both. So let us walk into a real department, and I want to start with HR because it is the one everyone underestimates. Here is why HR is dangerous. Think about what they hold. Identity documents, bank details, salary, medical certificates, background check results, disciplinary records, family details for insurance, and in many organizations, biometric attendance data. That is the most sensitive collection in the building, and it is usually managed by a team with no technical support and a lot of spreadsheets. Let me tell you what I find. Candidate data from people who were never hired, sitting in inboxes and drives for years. Nobody deletes it because nobody owns it after the role is filled. Background verification reports shared with 3 interviewers by email, still in those mailboxes 4 years later. And my favorite finding, the shared folder called HR Confidential, which on inspection 40 people could access because it had been set up in 2018 by someone who left. So what do you test? Start with the candidate lifecycle. What happens to unsuccessful applicants? Ask for the deletion evidence. There usually is not any. Then exit. When someone leaves, what stays and for how long and why? Then access. Who can see salary? Who can see medical? Ask them to show you the list. And ask one question. Have you ever received an access request from an employee? Watch the reaction. So now marketing, and I want to be fair to them before I start, because marketing gets blamed a lot and it is not usually malice. It is enthusiasm colliding with speed. Here is what happens. Marketing moves fast. They test tools. They buy a platform with a card. They import a list. They run a campaign this week because the quarter ends next week. And privacy paperwork moves at a completely different pace. So what do you find? Let me tell you. Lists with unknown origins. I asked a marketing manager where a contact list came from. She said, I think it was from the trade show and maybe some was purchased. It was 2 years ago. Tracking pixels nobody inventoried, quietly sending data to platforms in 3 countries. Purpose creep, which we discussed. Delivery numbers becoming promotional numbers. And unsubscribe handling that works in the tool but not in the CRM. So the person keeps getting called even after they opted out of email. So how do you audit this? Start with the tools. Ask finance for every marketing platform paid for in the last 2 years. Compare with the inventory. The gap is your first finding. Then take one campaign, any campaign. Ask, where did every contact in this come from and what consent covers this specific message? And ask the question that opens everything. What is the fastest you have ever launched a campaign? The answer tells you where the corners get cut. So now IT, and I want to warn you about a trap here. IT is usually the most technically competent team you will audit, and that competence can hide things. Here is what I mean. When you ask IT a question, you get a precise, confident, technically correct answer. And it is often an answer to a narrower question than the one you asked. Not deception, precision. So I encrypt my questions differently with IT. Instead of, is data encrypted? I ask, walk me to the place where this is not encrypted. There always is one, and asking that way gives permission to name it. Now, what do you actually find? Non-production environments. This is the big one. Development and test systems loaded with a copy of production data because that is the easiest way to test properly. Real customer records in an environment with weaker access controls accessed by contractors. I have found this at nearly every client I have audited, nearly everyone. Second, logs and monitoring data. Nobody thinks of logs as personal data, but they contain IP addresses, user identifiers, sometimes payloads, and they are retained forever because storage is cheap. Third, admin access. Who can see everything? Usually, more people than anyone realizes. And fourth, backups. Ask what is in them, how long they live, and what happens on restore. Ask IT to show you, not tell you. They will. They usually want to. So let us take a whole sector. And banking is fascinating because it presents the opposite problem from everything we have discussed so far. Here is what I mean. Banks are heavily regulated already. They have compliance teams, audit functions, retention schedules, security controls. So you might think DPDP is easy for them. It is not. Because their entire culture is built around retention, not deletion. Let me explain. Regulatory requirements tell a bank to keep records for years. So the reflex, deeply embedded, is keep everything forever, just in case. And now a law arrives saying delete when the purpose ends, and those two instincts collide. I sat with a bank's compliance head who told me honestly, we do not delete anything, ever. It has never been a risk before. So what do you test? First, the collision itself. Where regulatory retention ends, does anything happen? Usually not. Second, purpose. A bank collects data for a loan. Does that data then feed cross-selling? Almost always. Under what basis? Third, the recovery and collections chain. This is where I find the sharpest findings. Third-party agents with customer data on personal phones with no oversight. And fourth, KYC documents. Where do the scans live? Usually several places nobody mapped. Regulation is not compliance. Ask what happens after the regulator's clock stops. So now e-commerce, and here the challenge is different again. Speed and sprawl. Think about what an e-commerce platform actually is. It is not one system. It is 30 systems talking to each other. A storefront, a payment gateway, a logistics partner, a returns platform, a review system, a recommendation engine, a customer service tool, an analytics stack, a marketing suite, and a delivery partner who gets the customer's name, phone number, and address for every single order. Now ask yourself, who is the data fiduciary at each of those points? And does anyone in the organization know? Let me tell you what I found at one. Their delivery partner received full customer details for every order. Standard, necessary, fine. But the partner retained the data indefinitely, and the contract said nothing about deletion. 4 years of every customer address sitting with a logistics company nobody had audited. Second finding, Guest checkout. They allowed purchases without an account. So I asked, if a guest customer asks what data you hold, how do you find them? They could not. There was no identifier to search on. They had built a right they could not honor. Third, recommendation engines. Behavioral data, combined, inferring things nobody consented to. So test the edges, every partner, every handoff, and test guest flows because the exceptions are where design stops. So before our final walkthrough, let me give you the list. These are the findings I see almost everywhere, and if you remember nothing else, remember these. 1. Retention policies with no deletion mechanism. The policy is a promise nobody engineered. 2. Inventories that are wrong by a factor of 2 or 3. Shadow systems, forgotten tools, spreadsheets. 3. Access that accumulates. Levers still active, movers still holding old rights. 4. Consent that cannot be refused or cannot easily be withdrawn or was recorded without noting which notice version applied. 5. Rights that partially work. Access covering some systems. Correction in one place, not everywhere. 6. Vendors. Unmonitored after signing. Contracts describing companies that have since changed. 7. Cross-border transfers nobody counted, especially access-based ones. 8. Non-production environments holding production data. 9. Incident registers that are suspiciously empty because small things never get recorded. 10. Training measured by completion, not behavior. And 11. The quiet one. Governance that stops at the boundary. Here is what strikes me about that list. Not one of them is exotic. They are all ordinary. And that is the point. DPDP failures are rarely dramatic. They are accumulated ordinariness left unexamined. So let us put everything together and walk one through end to end. Imagine a mid-sized health tech company, 50,000 users, an app, a website, some clinical partners. Week 1, we plan. Objective, one sentence. Can this company demonstrate lawful, secure, and rights-respecting processing of user health data? Scope, the app and its supporting systems. Excluded, corporate HR, and we write down why. Risk assessment, one afternoon. Health data, so sensitivity is maximal. They migrated platforms last year. Nobody has looked at the old system. We now know where to point. Week 2, we understand. We build the universe from vendor payments and department interviews. Their list says 12 systems. We find 26. We walk one user record through everything. It touches 9 systems, 2 countries, and a spreadsheet. Week 3, we test. We try to decline consent and cannot. We ask for deletion evidence and get a policy instead. We compare levers to active accounts and find 6. We submit an access request as a real user. 19 days, 4 systems out of 9. Week 4, we report. One sentence. This company can secure data but cannot account for it or release it. Then follow up. Named owners, negotiated dates, evidence-based closure. That is the whole craft. Plan, understand, test, report, follow. Everything else is detail.